Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
The Cryptid Huntress. Once again, it is time to arise for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on StarFox Radio. Yet, I need to revamp myself before Jessica Jones and I figure out the infamous Dogman topic. Much better and delicious as always. Thank you for allowing me to regain my power source. Without further ado, it is time for the Cryptid Huntress and myself to take a walk into the darkness.
My creatures of the night, welcome back once again to another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here in the Fox Den on Star Fox Radio. Tonight we have again Jessica Jones, aka the Cryptid Huntress from Spaced Out Radio, who has decided to spend some more time with us and help figure out what the heck is going on with the Dogman. Miss Jones, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, I am doing excellent. Thanks for letting me come hang out with you tonight.
Well, thank you again for coming back. I mean, you're always welcome here. So you are quite the busy one. I always can fit you in for sure. So we definitely need to continue our collaborations. What's new your way?
Oh man, I've been doing a lot of work and research on Dogman actually this week. Dogman keeps coming up a lot in my world. Of course, I am a cryptid field researcher. I just got in from the woods. I spent the weekend out with my team doing a little bit of Bigfoot research, but we also have Dogman reports in the area where we were at. And got back home from the research, and I did a couple of shows on my channel. One involved the Texas Dogman Triangle. And I thought that would be something interesting to talk about with you this fine evening.
Yeah, that is definitely an interesting spot. The Texas Triangle, aka Dogman Triangle in general, for sure. I have fielded some pretty interesting calls, reports, and encounters down from that area. And actually, one of my buddies, Matt Harvey from Deep Woods Paranormal, who's supposed to be popping on hopefully Friday, he's around down in that area, and he's had some pretty interesting encounters reported to him as well. He actually works on the railroad system down there. Yeah, intriguing stuff. What have you been hearing down that way?
Oh man, guys that work on the railroads and the lumber yards, and they have the best sightings. I had my buddy Rod Nichols on my show, and he's from Bear County Bigfoot. It's spelled Bexar, Bear County. He came on. He's just like me. He's a Bigfoot field researcher, and he was at one point he was tracking what he thought was a Bigfoot. Well, I guess it was a Bigfoot. And they came across some other tracks that were a little different. They looked more canine, but they were big, like big canine tracks. And it was right in the middle of the Dogman Triangle. Now, the Dogman Triangle was actually, I think it was coined by, I want to say Aaron Deese, maybe. I think that's who wrote a book called The Dogman Triangle, Werewolves in the Lone Star State. I think it was coined by him. Small Town Monsters picked it up and did a movie about it, or a documentary. This is about a 700 square mile plot of land, basically from one city to the next. It forms a triangle, and it's around the San Antonio area, Plano, I think. They have a lot of dogman sightings, a lot of werewolf reports, and what Rod came across, he took pictures, he documented the tracks, the whole trackway, and I think he must have shown the pictures to Aaron, I assume, and he became part of the documentary that they were doing. It turns out they do believe those were dogman tracks that he found out there. So I brought him on my show. We talked a lot about the dogman and the werewolves, and trying to put our heads together as to why there's so many dogmen in Texas, so many werewolf reports. And of course, coming from a cryptid field researcher standpoint, I mean, we have dogman reports all over Georgia, where I live too. I mean, they're all over the country. But what is the deal with this area? 700 square mile swath of land. What makes this special? Like, why are there so many dogman reports there? Well, I don't think we ever came up with a great answer on that, okay? Because we got into the conversation about how we're looking for Bigfoot, and then we come across dogman. But they also have things like goatman reports out there. I mean, Texas has one of the highest rates of goatman sightings, okay, of all the states. And I know we're here to talk about dogman tonight, but it's important to note that it's not just dogman in this area. It's all sorts of different cryptids. So to me, in my opinion, I'm thinking there's a reason for the high strangeness. Now, I don't know if you're into like portal talk and dogman being just three-dimensional, or if they could be interdimensional beings, but it makes you wonder, when there's not just dogman in the area, but we've got a bunch of Bigfoot sightings and a bunch of goatman sightings, and the lake, is it the Lake Worth monster, I think is what it's called, things like that. I mean, lake monsters too in this area. It's just perplexing to me.
Those are all very valid and quite interesting points and aspects mentioned there for sure. And those are some spots where I feel like a lot of those questions, you yourself would probably have a lot of better insight and answers with some of those for sure. Yet, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Texas has, I believe, cave systems down there, correct?
They do. Well, and this is in the heart of like the Texas hill country. So lots of hills, rolling hills. There's caves all over the entire country. I have a cave expert on my team, and I know none of us are really experts on Bigfoot or anything like that. And my friend Craig, who I called my cave expert, he would never admit to being a cave expert, but he is a speleologist, I think is how you pronounce that. And he goes in and explores caves. And he was telling us this past weekend that he has to go on rescue missions to go find spelunkers. Okay, so that's not what he's not a spelunker. He's a person who goes in and really studies the caves. This is important. Okay, caves are important. And yes, I'm looking at a map right now. It says, where are America's caves? And Texas, right there where this Dogman Triangle is, there are definitely cave systems right there in that area. That could be why, potentially.
That's very interesting. The reason I asked that too is we're working on a theory as well as myself with some hypothesis about how if people look at the extinction, quote unquote, rate, cave hyenas really only potentially went extinct around 10,000, 11,000 years ago. That's a blink of the eye. And just recently in Saudi Arabia, there was a cave system found by the Smithsonian that I've mentioned numerous times with a ton of human animal bones as well, dragged in that are being consumed by hyenas. So like Jody Cook was saying, what are hyenas that are predatory like that, which known spotted hyenas are the only ones that hunt in groups and do that. The other type of versions of hyenas are scavengers that wouldn't collect massive amounts like that, which would be something packs would do because hyena packs can vary from either 6 to 136. So that type of behavior is spotted type hyena behavior, yet they're only known to be in Africa. So what would spotted hyenas be doing in Saudi Arabia, and there's cave systems there. And a lot of the reports are like Glenn from the LBO. He had seen the young couple being attacked by what looked like a large hyena type creature. And I believe, as well as some others within our group, that cave hyenas are still existing. And cave hyenas look like a wolf, quote unquote, with a large mane and pointy ears. I actually have an image of a striped hyena that has glowing eyes because of the way the camera is set up, and also the way their night vision is. And it has pointed ears and a large snout that looks canine. But hyenas are more closely related to martens, the weasel type family, than they are cats and dogs, but even more closely related, if you have to pick one after that, to cats over dogs. So they're not even closely related to canines at all, yet they would fit the description if they were to be up on their hind legs as some of the descriptions of the type 3 dogman. And also, if you look at evolution aspects, when you look at canines, their fifth digit has been pushed back up to their wrist. So evolution doesn't work the other way. It's not going to re-engineer that. That digit now is pretty much almost rendered useless. Whereas on hyenas, on their front paws, they almost have like an opposable thumb type deal. So that would also leave room for evolution to play. And then you have the Dinopithecus, which is an enormous baboon that lived down in Africa, but is also believed to have come up on the land bridge, and again also potentially not even ever gone extinct, that would look like a demon baboon type like werewolf with the pointy ears. And again, they also in theory would have used the cave systems. So that's why I'd asked that, because a lot of predatory animals of the past and present use cave systems, and it would make sense to still, if they are existing, to be using those for transportation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way you described that baboon type dogman, that's interesting because in the Bigfoot world, the type 3, I think it's type 3 Sasquatch, looks a lot like a baboon too. It has like a longer snout, and we would consider those like a gugway, I would assume. But some people think that like the gugway could be dogmen as well. So I don't know. There's just a fine line between all this, but thank goodness we have our charts so we can kind of see what the difference are. My team has experienced different types of Bigfoots just in the region where we research, which is mostly the southeastern United States. But very interesting. And I've had people, I do a lot of live shows. And I have people who leave comments, very intelligent, amazing comments. And I woke up this morning to a comment on one of my shows that I did about dogmen, and they were saying that dogmen is very matter of fact. They said dogmen are like ancient baboons. And I thought, man, and I thank them for their comment, but I was thinking, well, I had not really heard that before, but now here we are talking about it tonight.
Yeah, and the variations like you just spoke of, and that's something huge I try to explain to people. The terminology dogman doesn't necessarily have to solidify it being a canine type entity. It just means whoever saw it and originally dubbed that term, to them it looked potentially like a dogman, which a hyena or a large baboon like that standing upright looking at you would, well, potentially look like some sort of canine like werewolf dogman type creature. And people don't realize that baboons, for example, can run 30 miles per hour. That's pretty fast, and they can be quite comfortable bipedally as well as quadrupedally. And same thing with something like a hyena standing up on its hind legs. It's pretty enormous. And I think a lot of people just think the term dogman means it has to be canine based. And what I try to stress about that is, like I just said, it's just a terminology. I mean, there's a tree underneath that, as you and I are speaking about and just spoke about, the Dinopithecus, the baboon looking type, quote unquote, dogman. We don't think it's a baboon canine. We think it's, as just stated, an ancestor or potentially the Dinopithecus itself. It literally fits the description of the type version dogman that people see with that. And same thing with like Ryan Tremblay's encounter. He says he saw something that looked like a hyena, a massive hyena type like creature. So in theory, if they didn't go extinct, I mean, the mammoths were only reported to be extinct around the same time frame in Siberia, and yet there's reports supposedly that they still exist in small remote areas up there. Because I mean, the blink of an eye is 11,000 years ago. That's nothing. What makes people think that they still couldn't be around in smaller numbers? Because as you just stated, how much time do we spend in cave systems? Like, I would love, hopefully you have the answer now, but if not, if you could ask your friend if he's ever found anything inside cave systems that would look like they belong to potential human beings that had been it's been taken in there. Because no one really gets into caves like that, and these people are going missing in those areas. And I have a huge theory that if someone could get into these areas and we actually spend more time in there, we would find a ton of missing people's either backpacks, shoes, bones, remains. They're in there.
Oh, wow. Recently, in the past year, just did an investigation in Tennessee, in northern Tennessee, in a little town called Whitley. It's not even a town, but it's called Whitleyville, Tennessee, where me and the guys from Cryptid Warfare, my friend Drewski and his guys, we went to do an investigation of couple's home who had a cabin there on about 500 acres, or surrounded by mountains, a lot of farmland, not a whole lot of, like I said, it's not even a town. They might have had a stop sign there, but they were having Bigfoot activity, they were having Dogman activity. Vera had all this on video, from her cameras that were put around her house. But they had a cave about 30 feet from their back door, and a cave opening. And the legend went, all the locals said that at some point, a medicine man shaman of the Choctaw, this was Choctaw land, Native American land at one point, and they had banished skinwalkers to this cave behind her house, which was about 30 feet from her back door, like I said. And so she was having a whole lot of issues, and their house was getting hit, like slapped in the middle of the night. Her bed would rattle at night. We assumed there was some sort of maybe underground base there underneath her house. But because this is in the mountains of Tennessee. And so we went in. I didn't have a whole lot of experience with caves, but being a field investigator, I jumped on the chance to go there to investigate it. And I met the guys from Cryptid Warfare up there. We did a full out cave investigation and a full investigation of those 500 acres of property. Shout out to Drewski, by the way, okay, because we pretty much kicked butt and took names that weekend, and we had to do a lot of research on not only what would happen if we encountered dogmen in this cave. Okay, we were worried about skinwalkers as well, so I had to contact a Native American medicine man friend of mine to give me the lowdown on what to do in case we encountered one or more. And so that was interesting. But let me tell you, the cave was one of the scariest places I have ever investigated, as far as cryptid research goes. It's a whole other universe down there. It's a whole other world. And when you walk into these caves, it's like you're walking through a portal, literally. It's not like the outside world. The subterranean, cave systems it's a whole other ball game down there. And I don't even think I was prepared for what we encountered down there and what we experienced. It was creepy. Okay, it was the creepiest thing I've ever encountered, actually, down there. Of course, we didn't come across any skinwalkers, thank goodness. No dogmen ran out of them. And here's the interesting thing too, is that I'm a tracker. There were no track lines in there. Floor was completely muddy. It was thick with mud, and there were feathers from her. Her chickens were going missing, and there were feathers that were leading into these caves. Like something had taken the chickens out of her coop and taken them into the cave, but there were no footprints. None. Anywhere. We could not find a single footprint in that cave. No tracks. But not to say they're not in there, but they just didn't leave any tracks. So whatever was in there was probably walking on the walls, maybe. I mean, I just don't know. It still is mind-boggling to this day.
That is definitely some pretty gnarly stuff for sure. And I mean, just in general, the Texas Triangle and the Dogman Triangle, like you said, in those areas, there's just a ton of encounters like that and reports. Yet it's super intriguing to me because, as you just stated right there, obviously something I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, something had to be physical enough to pluck the chickens and pick them up and pull them into this quote unquote cave system type area. I don't think I've ever heard of, again, this isn't my specialty. I don't think I've ever heard of a ghost just plucking a live chicken and then eating it. That seems to me like something a live entity would be. A lot of people think that the Dogman is the same as hellhounds and other type manifestations. And I try to show that I think there's definitely a big difference right there with as what we were just talking about with the actual ancestral relatives that did exist and we think still exist fall into more of the physical aspects. And I think when people speak of manifestations for maybe negativity, or when they're in graveyards or the hellhounds and such, or when they shine flashlights on it, it goes through them. That's more of something that I don't specialize in, but I believe that's more paranormal based aspects, where if something lives and it's breathing and it's eating, say, a chicken, or like an example of a case from Kingston, New York, where these gentlemen shot this thing with a shotgun right in the chest. This dogman type creature, it screamed, blood flew out, it spun around, it ran up a tree, leapt over a huge ditch, then circled them to try to ambush them again, which I've heard of tigers and such doing that. Moral of that encounter is the thing ate some lead, it didn't like it. So if something, I guess, again, correct me if I'm wrong, if something is physical, whether it's sad, but it's true, whether it's an elephant or a massive blue whale, humans have specialized the capability of. So say if a T-Rex still existed, a T-Rex could still be taken down by a rocket launcher. Do you see what I'm saying? It's a live physical thing, but it still takes damage. So a cave hyena or a Dinopithecus or a relative of the Amphicenoidae or the Cynocephali, because Alexander the Great spoke of the Cynocephali being able to be wounded and such, but also being ferocious fighters. They were, in his eyes, physical. I mean, they took wounds and such. So if you're a physical living thing, weaponry is going to hurt you. But if you are something that's more spiritual, like I was saying, like a hellhound or something like a skinwalker or manifestations, then sure, yes, if you're not completely physical, then yeah, a physical weapon in theory obviously isn't going to work on you. But if you are a huge Kodiak bear that's massive like that and you shoot it, unfortunately, that beast still like, so if this massive quote unquote dogman is trying to open someone's cabin window, leaving scratches all over it, leaving slobber, attacking their van, attacking their horses, leaving footprints, then as those guys said, they shot it in the chest, and I've heard of other people shooting at them and such. So they're taking damage, which would, I guess, in theory, mean those type versions would have to be a physical entity, correct?
Correct. And as a field investigator, Drewski and I both were talking about this earlier today. You know, we go out there, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, we go fully armed, both of us. The whole team does. And because they are 3D, okay, we call it 3D, three-dimensional. They are here, they are flesh and bone. With the cave that we were investigating, the skinwalkers were a different ball game. Okay, I think that's different. That's a little
Yes.
different than Dogman, in my opinion. So that's why we're talking about the spiritual aspect of that. But with Dogman, I mean, that actually gives us a little bit of reassurance to know that we can, if something does charge at us, we can do something about it to stop it potentially. Okay, so we can, and we hope that never happens. I don't want that to happen, but we're prepared for it if it does happen, because yeah, they are flesh and bone. They are 3D, three-dimensional, and just like the Bigfoots are. We bet on that when we go out there. Okay. And I think you and I talked about that on the show the last time I was hanging out with you. We're talking about, well, could Dogman be ghosts, right? Like, could a Dogman be a spirit and stuff? I know it to be kind of confusing, and if you go down rabbit holes, you can really go deep down rabbit holes. Okay,
Yes.
but for us, for all intents and purposes tonight, Dogmen are 3D, 100%, just like Bigfoot, in my opinion. Very, very three-dimensional. That's why it gives me some comfort, actually, knowing that potentially I could protect myself from them if one did charge at me.
Well, Ryan Tremblay, for example, does a great job, and he's done it a couple times on my show about just some of the massive differences between, say, skinwalkers and a dogman and a werewolf. The curse of a werewolf is, as stated, a curse, whereas to be a skinwalker, you need to take the pelt of the animal that you and usually pretty much all those indigenous terminologies refer to being on all four, he or she or animal on all four. So you're pretty much turning into the animal that you've taken the pelt, and you are just a more intellectually based human version of the creature with your darker magic powers and now the capabilities of that animal. Yet, in theory, you would have to then take the pelt of a dogman to quote unquote be the skinwalker version of the dogman if you want to dive into it like that. So yes, there's a massive difference in that. And actually I spoke to an elder the other day and he was telling me some really cool stuff that some of his ancestors would speak of. This was just his theory, speak of some of the spectral type Sasquatch that they would see up in the mountains, but he seemed to think that they were seeing actual physical Sasquatch, but they were in the fog because it's a foggy area. So when you're seeing large beings in the fog, it could look like they were ghostly. They were just moving through the fog or watching you through the fog. So yeah, that's what I think about sometimes where there are differences, but I also think sometimes there are potential misidentifications as well, where, hey, if you saw that Sasquatch in the mist, you could think it was spiritual or spectral, but in actuality, it could just have been a physical being such as yourself looking back at you through the mist and the fog. And yes, to reassure you, there are tons of cases that we've been able to verify of these things taking physical damage and not enjoying it. Whether when it's chasing a car, the car swerves into it, it stumbles off, it yelps. Like I said, this gentleman shooting it in the chest, other people ramming it with their car, shining flashlights in their eyes, because don't ever do this, but just imagine shining a flashlight in the eyes of your cat or your dog. It's not going to like it. People slamming on their car horns, blaring air horns, spraying it in the face with bear mace and stuff because it's, again, if that version wasn't physical, those type of things wouldn't affect it, but they all do. There was one case where a woman was walking her dog in a pretty decently public neighborhood, but it was nighttime, so people were inside, and she claimed something dog-like, hyena-like, reached over the fence and tried to take her dog, and it actually kind of grabbed her jacket as well. Well, she starts screaming. The thing obviously was startled for a second. It's a smaller neighborhood. All the lights come on. People who know everyone stick their head out like, what's going on? She's screaming for help. The thing basically is now overwhelmed with sensory alert from people screaming, bright lights, all this chaos. It ran off. It's no different than, that's why zebras have stripes, right? So it confuses the lions sometimes. So when there's a crap ton of zebra running, the lion has its heightened senses. All it sees is lines, white and lines, and it's kind of like, what the heck's going on? I mean, look at like a house cat, same thing when it's got too much going on. Its senses is like, what the heck? It doesn't know which way to go. Like, am I playing with this? Am I doing this? Yeah, those wouldn't affect this version if it wasn't real. People in Wisconsin down by Bray Road wouldn't see this thing kneeling down drinking water in its hand. As far as I know, a ghost doesn't need to drink water. People wouldn't, as you just said, report things being dragged back to a cave system to be fed on, because as far as I know, paranormal, again, isn't my realm, but that would be probably more of them feeding on your fear, your spirit, etc. Why would they be taking huge chunks out of cows, being like, yum, yum, yum? That's something a hyena or a bear or a physical predator does, correct?
That's correct. So a lot of the reports that we get from around my area, uh, their dogmen, werewolves reported eating from carcasses of road. Okay, there's actually a couple here in the county where I live that called into the 911 center saying that they had hit what they thought was a large wolf, but it got up on two legs. They hit it with their car, but it got up on two legs and it ran off. And so they called it a werewolf. They were terrified. A lot of times when people have an encounter, they're picking up animals, they're eating they're doing stuff that is very much in our reality. You have to take all this into account. I've not heard a whole lot of stories about the paranormal aspect of Dogman, other than the portals like coming in and out of trees and stuff like that, which is it's kind of strange, but you get those reports too. To me, it is very much a flesh and bone type of an animal. Now, I wanted to address the fog because you had mentioned the dogmen being seen in the fog and the other cryptids. Well, there's a phenomenon out in Yellowstone National Park, and I'm not sure if you've heard about this, but it's called there's the Yellowstone fog, and some people say that Gugway hide in the fog. And we talked about Gugway at the beginning of the hour tonight. We're talking about Gugway potentially being very similar to Dogman, like the snouted Bigfoots. But some say that they're a Gugway that hide in the fog and kidnap hikers. Okay, so there's a cluster of missing people there at Yellowstone National Park, of course, according to David Paulides' Missing 411 series and on his map. And some say that it's because they think it could be because the Gugway are hiding in that fog
Why would they
and
not?
snatching up. Mm-hmm.
I mean, like you just said, hiding in the fog, that's such a great point. I mean, any sort of predator, though, is going to take advantage of its surroundings. That makes 100% like logical sense. Tigers, tall grass, crocodiles, murky water, polar bears, snow with their white backings. Super intriguing.
Oh yeah, it's actually a wonderful topic, and I wish I had my notes here because I've actually talked about it quite a bit in the past. Because one of my missions is to discuss and to bring attention to all the missing people out of our national parks, and to try to figure out where these people are going. Where are they? What happened to them? And there's no trace. These are the people who there's no trace. I spend a lot of time in national and state parks doing field research, and I take my kid out there sometimes. And I think that we as Americans here in the USA, we deserve to know, what the higher ups know, like where are all these people going? Is there some kind of connection to cryptids?
I think the big problem is they know, yet they also know how, unfortunately, panic would ensue. I mean, I've used this reference before, but with the War of the Worlds, when they read it over the radio in the past and people believed it was really occurring and they were committing terrible acts to their families themselves, jumping out of windows and just doing insane things, but it was just a story. It wasn't real. And if they were to admit to people that these type things could be existing, it's then gonna have to cause, well, do we need to protect this species? So it's gonna affect revenue now because logging, etc. But also, how is the mainstream public gonna handle this reaction when we specify, hey, this does exist? So there's a lot that plays into that realm too of them, why they would want to cover that up. I mean, it's probably not the best technique to be like, hey, come camp down here when there's been 12 grizzly bear attacks in the last 3 months, or etc. They're going to probably try to differentiate that. The reason I say that is I've heard things about Florida, since it's a really touristy area, covering up actually how many fatal shark attacks they really do have. So yeah, because it ties into, I mean, no difference like in the real life Jaws scenario when that was really occurring. They didn't want to close down the beach because of revenue. I think that has a lot to do with it, but I also really truly do think that if people can get into the cave systems like your friend, I really do think people are down there, or that their remains. I think that's where these people are going in the national parks because no one searches the caves like that. And if we do, it's a brush of the surface, or they're in areas that have already kind of previously been explored when we know there's a crap ton of areas that are unexplored. And recently, why did the Smithsonian just find that cave system with a ton of human and animal bones that are being pulled in by the hyenas? That's proof right there that entities that are physical are using these cave systems, and there were remains in there. So if there's remains over there of those missing people and such, and missing farm animals that were there, why would these missing people also, I guess, in theory, not be in the cave systems?
Absolutely. And I think that the key words are revenue, okay, and controlling the narrative on this. That's something that I kind of worry about a little bit as a researcher going out in the field and knowing that there's potentially been a cover up of all these missing people at the national parks, and so imminent threat. in my opinion. That's a danger to us. Now, I don't want anybody who's listening to this show to be scared to go to your national parks. Please go, have fun, enjoy yourselves, but please be aware of your surroundings, because there are a lot of things that go down there and we can't explain it. I was out there this past weekend in an area that was on land. Okay. And so the dangers are real. Okay. The dangers are real. And so I keep a very close eye. If I ever have my kid out there, I never let him wander off. He does not go many feet from me. Okay. Like he's always right by my side. Just because we just don't know. And I'm not even worried about the dogmen out there. And we do have reports of those out there. I'm not worried about the dogmen. I'm not worried about the Bigfoots when it comes to my safety as much as I am just being snatched up and going missing.
No, preach, my friend. That's all very excellent, and I couldn't agree with more what was just stated. So I do look forward to getting you back on here. I do know you have a super busy schedule, so we unfortunately must let you go. But do please keep in touch with any sort of updates you have, and let me know your time frame, and we would love to get you back on here and pick your mind again for sure.
Oh, I'll be back anytime. I always make time for you. I love it. I love hanging out with you.
Such kind words. I appreciate you much.
Thank you for everyone who stopped by for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy tonight on Star Fox Radio. If you did enjoy this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it. Feed the algorithm. And until next time, stay safe out there.